Okay, hopefully you got through that second video. You did some practicing, and I'm going to share my screen once more with you. There we go. All right. And let's look at a practical example of how this is translated in a real sentence. This is actually from your exercise translation. This is sentence number 2, and I think I also use sentence number, number 11. So let's look, use this as an example. Let's look at it here. I'm going to put this on here. So here's the sentence. Postia adevimus servus donorum causa laboriosi ut milites fidelis heri narrowant. We've got actually a couple of different things going on here. First thing I want you to know is we want to chunk this. And the first thing I'm going to do, if we're noticing this, we go, oh, adevimus. That's a head verb. It's to hear. So that's a head verb. And I notice that immediately it's followed by an accusative, and then just a few words down is an infinitive. So I know that that accusative is not actually a direct object. It's the subject of that infinitive. So I know here that I have an indirect statement. So I'm going to chunk this. The first part of the sentence is just postia adevimus. But the main part of the secondary part of the sentence, however, is this really long section. It's all acting like the direct object of adevimus. Interestingly enough, however, we actually have two separate clauses here. We actually have another secondary clause that we should bracket that off. I probably should have put brackets. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and do this here just so that you can see these. This will be helpful, I think. There's one here, and then there's one here, just like that. Okay, that'll help us out here. So you actually have three distinct parts to this sentence. You have the main sentence, postia adevimus, all of the secondary part here, servus, all the way down to narrowant, I can't say that fast, is basically acting as the direct object for adevimus, but that can be broken up into two sections. You've got the servus laboriosi, which is the indirect statement, and then you've got a third clause actually, ut milites fidelis hereri narrowant. So let's break this down here. All right, let's pull the sentence back up here. Move this out of the way. I don't know if you can actually see. I don't know if y'all can see if my screen is covering up that thing or not. It may be. So first thing is, we notice that postia is a conjugation. What do we know about adevimus? Okay, it's the main verb, right? And if we were to parse that verb, take the time to parse it, right? It's active voice, indicative, perfect. It's first person plural, all right? We got servus. We've already determined that it's an accusative, but it's being used as a subject. You got donorum, obviously that's genitive plural. It's an adjective modifying, not servus, it's modifying actually causa, right? And you've got causa, which is ablative. And it's an ablative, which is preceded by a genitive. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then, of course, you have your infinitive. And man, I need to move this screen out of the way. Hold on. Let me move that down here. And let's hit play again. Pull that back up here. Now we're not having that cover that up. All right. So laboriosi is an infinitive, but it's the subordinate infinitive, right? It's not the main verb. It's a subordinate verb. And if you're going to parse that, you see that it's an infinitive, and I did not put an E there. I'll have to fix that. But it is an active, perfect infinitive. Notice it's the third principal part plus issy. That makes it the active, perfect infinitive. The rest of the sentence, you got another conjunction, ut, followed by milites, which is subject. It's an nominative plural, followed by an adjective that it's also an nominative plural, so it's modifying milites. You got an adverb with heri, and you've got another verb that's part of the verb for this clause. And of course, it's a subordinate to the main sentence. And if you were to parse it out, it's active indicative. Pluperfect, notice its third principal part, narawa. I don't know why I can't say that. Narav, that's the way I say it. Narav plus arant, that's your pluperfect ending. Third person plural, so it's narawerant. Okay, so let's walk us through this here. Afterwards, postia. Afterwards, we heard, perfect tense. We heard that. We're gonna before we actually we're gonna translate literally before I translate with the actual translation. Sorry. Slaves. So how do we translate accusative plural? That's simply slaves. Servos is slaves. Donorum is of the gifts, of gifts. Genitive plural. Causes, ablative. Okay, so it's for the sake of, for the sake of. Technically, this would be, since it's ablative, would be by, with, or from the sake. But this is important. It's a grammar syntax rule here that if you have the word cause, causa, that is preceded by a genitive, you actually translate, excuse me, if you have the word cause that's in the ablative, preceded by a genitive, you translate it for the sake of, instead of by, with, or from the sake of, for the sake of. That phrase will ultimately be for the sake of the gifts. All right, for the sake of the gifts, you've got your infinitive, which you would literally translate it to have worked. That's how you would literally translate the active perfect infinitive, to have worked. Then your rest of the sentence, conjunction as, milites soldiers, nominative plural, faithful, tomorrow, yesterday, and then your subordinate verb, not from naro, pluperfect is had reported. They had reported. So how do you put this all together in a sentence? So don't forget, we have to add in English, because we know this is an indirect statement, we have to add the word that. We add the word that. So here's the ultimate translation here, all right? Afterwards, we heard that the slaves, servos, slaves had worked. Notice that the infinitive, to have worked, laborawisi. Let's think about this. We translate that in relationship to the tense of the main verb. The main verb is in the perfect tense. The subordinate verb is also in the perfect tense. That means it is happening before the action of the main verb. So you have to add the word had. So afterwards, we heard that the slaves had worked for the sake of the gifts, or the rewards. And this was as the faithful soldiers, milites fidelis, reported yesterday. So afterwards we heard that the slaves had worked for the sake of the gifts, as the faithful soldiers had reported yesterday. Let me show you what this looks like if we were to diagram this sentence. All right, I'm going to go into editing mode so I can sort of walk us through it here. Here's the main sentence. The subject is understood from adiwimus, we heard. And then this entire phrase, this whole rest of the sentence is basically acting as the direct object of this verb. We heard that, and then servos is the subject of this infinitive verb. We heard that the slaves had worked for the sake, this is an ablative prepositional phrase, for the sake, genitive, of the gifts. They had worked for the cause of the sake of the gifts. We've got a conjunction here, ut, as, just as the soldiers, which is the subject of, I misspelled that, I need to fix it. Just as the soldiers, faithful soldiers, had reported yesterday. So that's how that is diagrammed. Let's look at the next slide here. Matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and fix this while I'm still here. This is spelling here. Yeah, got it. All right, we got that. So let's look at this next slide here. So again, this is the main sentence, post the adiwimus, that's the main sentence. This entire thing, in the black brackets here, is the direct object of this verb, okay? All right, let's look at another example here. This is the last sentence, and we'll just work your way here. I think this is number 11. This is part of your homework, so you're actually getting 2 of your sentences done in homework. So, credunt magistram sapientum veritatum petefactorum esse. So notice we have credunt, which is a head verb, means to think, right, or believe, right? You've got magistram, which is an accusative, which is followed by, way down at the end of the sentence, but it's still followed by an infinitive. That means magistrum is actually a subject that's in the accusative. So let's work this through here, all right? We know we got an indirect statement. So credunt, main verb, it's active indicative present tense third plural. Magistrum is a subject, but it's an accusative. Sapientum is an adjective accusative modifying magistrum. Veritatum is a direct object, it's accusative, it's an adjective. I don't know why I put adjective. That should say accusative. Let me fix that. This is what happens when you copy and paste. All right, back to it here. There we go. All right, direct object, it's accusative. And then you have your infinitive, subordinate verb. Let's parse that. An infinitive, it is active and it is future. It is the future active infinitive. So how do we translate this? Well, they believe, simply, they believe, Magistrum is the teacher, the wise teacher, truth. And then the infinitive active future for patafacto would be patafactio would be translated as to be about to expose. So let's put this into regular translation here. Main verb is present. The infinitive is future. That means it's happening after the main verb. The action of the infinitive is happening after that. So let's look at it. They believe, if they have the word that, they believe that the wise teacher, the Magistrum Sapientium, the wise teacher will expose or reveal the truth. Direct object for the infinitive is veritatum, the truth. They believe that the wise teacher will expose or reveal the truth. So that's it. That's how you translate in indirect statements. Three things: look for a head verb. Main verb is a head verb. Look for followed very quickly by an accusative. That's actually a subject, and it's the subject of an infinitive that follows quickly after. Therefore, you have an indirect statement. Practice those, guys. Email me if you have any questions. We'll talk to you later.